What if the stones of the earth could speak? What if they told us of a memory older than cities, older than the pyramids, older even than agriculture itself? In the dry hills of southeastern Turkey, on a mound the locals once called Potbelly Hill, the ground held a secret buried for millennia. That secret was Göbekli Tepe. It was first noticed in 1963 by a team surveying the land. Limestone pillars jutted awkwardly from the soil, dismissed as the ruins of a forgotten Byzantine cemetery. For decades, the stones lay ignored. Farmers grazed their animals around them, never knowing they stood atop the oldest temple ever built. Then came 1994. A German archaeologist, Klaus Schmidt, walked those hills and realized at once that these were not gravestones. They were monuments, deliberately carved, deliberately buried. He began to dig, and what he uncovered would shake the foundations of history. The earth gave way to something unbelievable. Out of the soil emerged T-shaped pillars, some 18 feet tall, weighing up to 20 tons. They were arranged in great circular enclosures, rising like a forest of stone. Each pillar bore carvings, foxes slinking in relief, vultures spreading wings, snakes winding as if alive. These were not random decorations. They were deliberate, purposeful, profound. And the dating defied reason. The site was constructed around 9600 BC, 11,600 years ago. To put this into perspective, Göbekli Tepe is 7,000 years older than the pyramids of Egypt and 5,000 years older than Stonehenge. It was built before the invention of pottery, before metallurgy, before the wheel, before agriculture. By every assumption, the people of that age were simple hunter-gatherers, bands of nomads following herds across the plains. How could such a people build something so massive, so sophisticated, and so intentional? This is the paradox of Göbekli Tepe. It should not exist. Imagine the Stone Age, small tribes, stone tools, survival by the hunt. And yet here, monuments requiring thousands of hours of labor, coordination, and a vision beyond mere survival. These stones whisper of organization, planning, of a priestly class guiding the work. They whisper of a culture that knew how to gather, design, and align. The question is not simply how they built it, but why. The pillars themselves demand attention. Standing in circles, two central monoliths dominate each enclosure, surrounded by smaller stones like congregants around priests. The arrangement speaks of ritual, of worship. Archaeologists call it the world's first temple. But temple to whom? To what? The carvings show no human faces, no clear gods. Only animals, symbols, and shapes, enigmatic, otherworldly. And here lies the first mystery. Göbekli Tepe rewrites our timeline. For decades, scholars believed agriculture came first, then villages, then religion, then monumental architecture. But Göbekli Tepe turns this upside down. Here, a temple existed before the plow, suggesting that religion, not farming, may have sparked civilization. That human beings first gathered not to grow crops, but to worship. Schmidt himself said, "First the temple, then the city." If true, then faith, ritual, and the hunger for meaning were the seeds of civilization. But even that cannot explain the scale. Each pillar weighs as much as 20 cars. They were quarried, shaped, and hauled without beasts of burden, without wheels, without metal tools. Imagine teams of men straining against ropes, dragging stones across hills. Imagine the organization required, the will to align them in circles, to carve them with symbols that spoke a language we no longer understand. This was not the work of a few. It was the work of hundreds, perhaps thousands, united in vision. The site itself is vast. Archaeologists estimate at least 20 such enclosures lie buried beneath the mound, yet only a fraction has been excavated. What else lies hidden beneath the soil? What stories remain untold? Standing there, among those pillars, one feels the weight of silence. These stones were raised in a world closer to the Ice Age than to ours, by people who should have known nothing of architecture, astronomy, or symbolism. Yet they left behind the first great monument of humankind, and then, deliberately, they buried it. That burial may be the greatest mystery of all. Göbekli Tepe was not slowly covered by time. It was intentionally filled in with earth and rubble, sealed as if its builders wanted it preserved, hidden, or protected. Why would they do this? To preserve a message for the future? To shield it from desecration? Or was the site already haunted by the memory of a catastrophe and burial became its funeral? The very stones speak of paradox. They proclaim advanced knowledge, yet emerge from an age of supposed ignorance. They whisper of ritual and meaning, yet refuse to reveal their God. They tell of glory, then silence themselves beneath the earth. For 30 years, scholars dismissed the stones as primitive. But when their true age was revealed, it forced archaeology to its knees. If hunter-gatherers built this, then what else were they capable of? If a temple older than history itself could rise in Turkey's hills, what else waits beneath forgotten soil? And here, for those who read history through the lens of faith, is another echo. In Genesis, after the flood, men built towers to reach the heavens, monuments to memory and meaning. Could Göbekli Tepe be such a monument? A place where survivors of catastrophe gathered to carve warnings into stone lest their story be forgotten? We cannot yet answer, but the mystery remains. Stones older than the written word, speaking a language without letters, asking questions older than history itself. Göbekli Tepe is no mere ruin, it is a message in silence. And that message begins not with farming, not with cities, but with worship, humanity's eternal reach for meaning. At first glance, the carvings of Göbekli Tepe appear to be little more than an ancient menagerie. Foxes, vultures, scorpions, snakes, lions. But the longer one stares, the more unsettling they become. They are not random wildlife sketches. They are too deliberate, too patterned. They are placed in precise positions on pillars, often in sequences, as though they were words in a language lost to time. The most famous of these is Pillar 43, the so-called vulture stone. Its surface is crowded with images, a vulture holding what looks like a circular object, a scorpion stretched beneath, strange geometric symbols, and smaller creatures etched in sequence. For decades, archaeologists debated their meaning. Were these simply artistic decorations or something more? Recent breakthroughs turned debate into revelation. Researchers began noticing that certain shapes, an H symbol, crescents, birds in flight, recurred across different enclosures. This consistency hinted at a symbolic system. In 2017, a team from the University of Edinburgh approached the carvings with fresh eyes, using the tools of archaeoastronomy, the study of how ancient peoples recorded the heavens. What they found was shocking. The animal carvings aligned with constellations. The scorpion was not merely an insect. It represented Scorpius. The vulture symbol pointed to Sagittarius or Aquila. Other creatures mapped onto stars as well. The circular object held aloft was not random. It likely represented the sun. The arrangement was a star map, a recording of the sky at a specific moment in time. And when the night sky of 10,950 BC was reconstructed by computer software, it matched. The carvings on Pillar 43 reflected an actual celestial alignment from over 11,000 years ago. Suddenly, what looked like primitive animals became evidence of sophisticated astronomy. But why? Why would Stone Age hunter-gatherers track constellations with such precision? The answer may lie in the very purpose of Göbekli Tepe itself. Imagine men standing on that hilltop, night after night, watching the heavens in silence. To them, the stars were not distant suns, but living messengers. The movements of scorpions, vultures, and lions in the sky were omens, signs, warnings. The pillars became their memory stones, an eternal record of what they saw above and what they feared would return below. Think of the magnitude of this revelation. Writing, as we understand it, did not emerge until thousands of years later in Sumer and Egypt. Yet here, 7,000 years earlier, was a proto-writing, a language of animals and symbols that carried meaning across generations. This was not literature, but survival. They were encoding history into stone, and the emotional weight deepens when we consider their circumstances. These were people emerging from the Ice Age, survivors of natural chaos, their lives fragile before the fury of the elements. To them, the sky was not merely beautiful, it was dangerous. It was the canvas upon which catastrophe was painted. By recording constellations, they were perhaps recording disaster itself. There is something profoundly human in this act. Across time and cultures, people have looked to the heavens for guidance. Shepherds in Mesopotamia, priests in Egypt, prophets in Israel, all read the skies. Even Scripture tells us that the heavens declare the glory of God, and that signs in the stars mark seasons and warnings. What Göbekli Tepe carved in stone is not so different from what biblical writers recorded in word, that the heavens tell a story, if only we have eyes to see. The H symbol, appearing on several pillars, may represent a connection between earth and sky, between two realms joined by a bridge. Birds in flight etched into patterns may suggest migrations, or souls carried heavenward. The vulture itself, a creature of death and rebirth, holding the sun, could symbolize both destruction and hope. These are not idle doodles. They are theology in stone, the cosmology of a people struggling to understand why their world changed so violently. And here is where the carvings grow even more haunting. If they were a record of stars at a precise time, then they were also a record of an event. They were not simply watching the heavens, they were warning us. The message becomes clearer. Something catastrophic had happened, tied to the movements of the stars, something they feared would happen again. What kind of catastrophe? That revelation would come later, with the deciphering of cosmic events known as the Younger Dryas. But for now, what we must recognize is this. Göbekli Tepe was not just the world's first temple. It was the world's first library. A library without parchment, without ink, without words, but a library nonetheless. Its shelves were pillars, its books were carvings, its message written not in alphabet, but in animal and symbol, and it survived. For over 11,000 years, buried beneath the earth, it waited. It waited until archaeologists brushed away the soil, until satellites and software could map the heavens, until our own technology was advanced enough to read what they had written. It is almost as if they built it for us. There is a sobering echo here with biblical thought. Ecclesiastes tells us that God has set eternity in the human heart. Even in their most primitive state, men and women sought to mark the eternal. They longed to communicate with the future, to shout across the abyss of time, "Remember, do not forget what we endured." So when we stand before those pillars today, we are not merely tourists among ruins. We are readers of a book carved by trembling hands that saw the sky blaze with terror and wrote it down so that one day we would know. The pillars of Göbekli Tepe are more than stone. They are language, language written in images, language that outlived its builders, language that whispers to us still. And what that language describes is not art, not myth, but apocalypse. The pillars of Göbekli Tepe do more than preserve memory. They cry out a warning. The constellations they record do not mark mere beauty in the sky, but disaster on Earth. The stars became a calendar of catastrophe. Around 10,900 BC, the world was emerging from the last ice age. Temperatures were rising, glaciers were retreating, rivers swelled with fresh meltwater. Humanity, small and scattered, was learning to flourish in a gentler climate. Then, without warning, it was ripped away. The Younger Dryas began. A sudden plunge back into near ice age conditions lasted for more than 1,000 years. Temperatures dropped dramatically. Vast swaths of North America and Europe returned to bitter cold. Megafauna, the mammoth, the saber-tooth, the giant sloth, vanished into extinction. Human populations, fragile and few, crashed. For centuries, scientists puzzled over what triggered this event. Theories of shifting ocean currents or draining glacial lakes struggled to explain the scale and speed of devastation. But then came new evidence. Layers of blackened soil rich with nanodiamonds, magnetic spherules, and platinum anomalies. These are signatures of something violent, something cosmic. A comet, or rather, fragments of a massive comet, breaking apart and raining fire upon the northern hemisphere. The strikes would have melted ice sheets, flooding coasts, and choking the skies with smoke. Firestorms raged, animals perished, climates collapsed. Across the world, humanity shivered in darkness and fear. Now, through the carvings of Göbekli Tepe, researchers suggest the people who survived tried to record this trauma in stone. Pillar 43, the so-called vulture stone, is not just a star chart. It is a memorial. The scorpion, the vultures, the symbols, they are not mere animals, but omens of death, cosmic fire, and celestial judgment. The survivors etched their apocalypse into rock. Imagine what it must have felt like. The sky itself becomes a weapon. Blazing objects streak overhead, exploding into fireballs that sear the earth. Thunder without rain, light without hope. A world plunged back into ice and hunger, entire species wiped away. In that chaos, survivors clung to memory. They gathered at a hilltop, raised pillars larger than themselves, and carved the story for the ages. It was not the first time humanity remembered catastrophe. Myths from every corner of the earth echo with similar tales. The Sumerian flood story of Gilgamesh, the Greek account of Atlantis, drowned in a single day, Native American legends of fire falling from the sky, Hindu texts describing world-ending flames, Norse prophecy of Ragnarok, fire and ice consuming the earth, and of course, the biblical story of Noah's flood, waters rising to cleanse a corrupted world, followed by a covenant of survival. Are these coincidences? Or are they cultural memories of the same event? Göbekli Tepe makes the connection hard to ignore. It stands as physical evidence that at least one community sought to preserve the memory of a global cataclysm. Their message is simple. This happened. It will happen again. Remember, the implications are staggering. Archaeologists long believed civilization began with farming, with the taming of plants and animals. But what if it began with survival, with the need to record, to warn, to worship in the face of destruction? Göbekli Tepe may be the testimony of survivors from an advanced pre-flood society. Perhaps they were not primitive at all, but the last heirs of knowledge passed down from a world erased by fire and ice. This would explain the paradox. Hunter-gatherers should not have had the skills to build Göbekli Tepe. But survivors of catastrophe might. They would remember what had been lost, cling to fragments of astronomy, architecture, and organization. They could not rebuild their world, but they could carve its memory. And there is a moral weight here. Humanity often forgets. We grow confident, believing the world is stable, that tomorrow will resemble today. But ancient survivors remind us otherwise. They wanted their children and their children's children to look at the stones and know the heavens can turn against you. Disaster is cyclical. You must be vigilant. From a Christian perspective, this strikes a familiar chord. The flood of Noah, too, was both destruction and mercy, a world undone, but a remnant preserved. Afterward, God set the rainbow in the sky as a covenant, a reminder of both judgment and grace. At Göbekli Tepe, the rainbow is absent, but the instinct is the same, to record judgment in stone so the future will not forget. The symbols at Göbekli Tepe thus become more than archaeology. They are testimony. They are sermons preached by hands long turned to dust. They proclaim the fragility of civilization, the violence of creation, and the need to remember. And perhaps most haunting of all, they suggest the builders believed it would happen again. The same sky that once betrayed them could betray humanity again. It is here that archaeology collides with prophecy. For if the ancients were right, if comets and cosmic debris strike Earth in cycles, then their warning is not a relic of the past. It is a message for us. What was once a mystery of carved animals now feels like a voice calling across 12,000 years. A voice whispering that the fire that burned them can burn us too. Göbekli Tepe is not simply the world's oldest temple. It is a monument to survival and a warning etched in stone. Civilizations fall, but memory must endure. The most unsettling mystery of Göbekli Tepe is not that it was built, but that it was buried. Archaeologists agree the site did not vanish under slow centuries of dust and erosion. It was deliberately filled in, tons of earth, stones, and rubble, carefully packed to seal the monuments. Whoever raised these pillars chose, at some point, to entomb them. They did not want their creation destroyed. They wanted it preserved, hidden, waiting. Why? Some say the site served its purpose as a place of worship or memory, and so was respectfully closed. Others suggest a community on the brink of collapse sealed it as a time capsule, so their knowledge would survive even if they did not. The most haunting theory is prophetic, that the builders feared the catastrophe could strike again, and so they buried their warning for a distant generation, for us. Today, only about 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. Ground-penetrating radar suggests at least 20 circular enclosures remain underground, untouched. What secrets lie beneath? More star maps? Mathematical systems? Even older layers of construction recording disasters before the Younger Dryas? Every season of digging reveals greater sophistication, suggesting the deepest levels may contain the most profound knowledge. It is staggering to consider. A Stone Age civilization deliberately creating an archive, sealing it beneath the earth so that one day, when humanity was advanced enough, it would be found and understood. And indeed, only now, with our technology to map constellations backward in time, to detect comet debris streams, to compare myths with geology, are we beginning to read the message they left. And their message is terrifying. Göbekli Tepe's symbols do not just describe a catastrophe of the past. They point to cyclical danger. The carvings may record not only what happened, but what happens repeatedly. Earth's periodic encounters with comet debris, particularly the Taurid meteor stream. Modern astronomy confirms that Earth still passes through this stream. It contains countless fragments. Most burn harmlessly in the sky as shooting stars. But hidden among them are giants, mile-wide objects capable of global devastation. Scientists today take this threat seriously. NASA's Planetary Defense Office tracks over 30,000 near-Earth asteroids. Yet detection is imperfect. Objects can approach from the glare of the sun, unseen until too late. Comets from the outer solar system appear suddenly, like interstellar visitors. In 2013, a meteor only 20 meters wide exploded over Chelyabinsk, Russia, injuring over 1,000 people. That was a pebble compared to what Göbekli Tepe's builders endured. And here, the ancient and the modern align. They carved into stone what we model with supercomputers, that Earth lives in a shooting gallery of cosmic debris. Impacts are not a question of if, but when. The ancients saw it happen. They watched their world burn, and they tried to warn us. The burial of Göbekli Tepe now seems less like an ending and more like an act of faith. The builders believed in tomorrow. They believed that some future people, wiser and better prepared, would find their message. They sealed their testimony like a letter in a bottle and cast it into time. And after 11,000 years, we have opened it. But what will we do with it? Here lies the Christian echo. Scripture speaks of knowledge buried, of mysteries hidden until the appointed time. Daniel was told to seal up the words of the scroll until the time of the end. At Göbekli Tepe, humanity itself sealed up words, not written, but carved into stone, until an age advanced enough to read them. Is it coincidence that we are that age, or providence? For believers, the warning carved in Göbekli Tepe does not contradict faith, it complements it. It reminds us that creation groans, that judgment and renewal are woven into history. Just as the rainbow was set as a covenant after the flood, so perhaps these pillars were set as a monument after fire and ice. One speaks of God's mercy, the other of humanity's memory, and now both converge upon us. Across the world, myths of destruction converge too. Atlantis swallowed by waves, Ragnarok's fire and ice, native legends of Skyfire, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and Noah's flood, all different tongues, all echoing the same trauma. Göbekli Tepe provides the stone to link myth to history, memory to reality. The ancients were not inventing stories, they were remembering. And if their message is true, then we live not at the end of the story, but in its continuation. The same cosmic threats still move across the heavens. The same cycles continue. The same fragility remains. But so too does hope. Unlike the builders of Göbekli Tepe, we have tools to detect, to deflect, to prepare. We have knowledge they lacked. They left us their memory. We must answer with action. Standing before Göbekli Tepe today, beneath the hot Turkish sun, among stones older than history, one cannot escape the sense of being watched, not by gods, but by ancestors. Survivors who raised these monoliths, buried them in grief and hope, and whispered through them across time. Do not forget what destroyed us. Do not let it destroy you. Their world ended. Ours does not have to. Göbekli Tepe is not just a ruin. It is prophecy in stone. It is the memory of an apocalypse and the anticipation of another. And perhaps, by uncovering it now, in our own precarious age, we are given a final gift, the chance to listen. The builders could not save themselves, but perhaps they can still save us.